program, we are honored to have Dr. Arthur Herman for our second Fireside Chat. He's not only one of our nation's great historians, but also one of the keenest current defense and tech analysts. He holds the honor of being a Pulitzer Prize finalist and a serial best-selling author. His works include Freedom Forge on the World War II mobilization, To Rule the Waves on the British Navy, and MacArthur, American Warrior. He previously served as a national security official in the first Trump administration and now holds the title of Senior Fellow at both the Hudson Institute and Civitas at the University of Texas at Austin. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Herman to the stage for the conversation, along with the moderator, Govini Senior Vice President for Government Relations, Jeb Nadaner.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And we are just so fortunate to have one of the truly magisterial historians with us today, my good friend Arthur Herman, who already was of help to me back in the Pentagon 20 years ago. So Arthur, thank you again for being here.
My pleasure.
I want to start with Freedom's Forge. Just one of over 10, you have over 10 books, but this is the one book that a lot of people in our field know. In Freedom's Forge, it describes an America of plenty. It describes an America that does prodigious production of armaments in World War II. The last 35 years of defense acquisition in the United States is a very different story. Ever less production, ever slower, and ever more costly. My question to you is there an opportunity in this Trump 47 administration to change that trajectory?
Yeah, by the way, enormous pleasure to be here and to be here with this audience, to be talking about issues which are of such urgent, I think, moment today. The question of what has happened with both our defense industrial base and what's happened with our acquisition and procurement systems, and why are they in such lousy shape? You know, the way I think about it, when I was a kid, I was fascinated by archaeology. And I was fascinated by sites like ancient Troy, you know, in which the city would build one upon the other, right? Layer upon layer. And then the next city would spring up, then the next one founded on that, the next one on that. Again, with Troy, you've got 9 levels, right, that the archaeologist digs down and finds and discovers in the process. Well, in many ways, I kind of think the DoD acquisition and procurement system is kind of like an archaeological dig. You know, it's like Troy. There's like so many different levels because over time, right, this one bureaucratic layer has been laid upon the one, upon the other, and you go back and you can find the different layers, you know, the McNamara years with the establishment of the PPBE system. Then you had reforms in the 70s, and then you had Goldwater Nichols, and then other reforms. And each time the reforms, right, it's like they don't seem to fix it. It almost seems to get worse, right? What's the old adage, right? The latest grievance is the last reform. But like an archaeological dig, what the treasure lies at the deepest level. And the deepest level is the level where we were able to mobilize the resources of the American economy, of American industrial system, of American private enterprise to produce war material on a scale that was unimaginable at the time and that now seems to be simply in the realm of myth. I mean, you look at the numbers, right? Look at the numbers during World War II, of what it was possible to produce. You know, 350,000 airplanes. You're talking about 2.5 million machine guns. By 1944, we're producing 8 aircraft carriers a month. We're producing a warplane every 5 minutes. We're producing 50 merchant ships a day, and you have to ask yourself, what the hell is going on here? Well, what's going on is the unleash that energy, the drive, the innovation that was embedded in America's private sector, in its business sector. And in many ways, it's because the United States had no choice in the summer of 1940, when my book starts, and Roosevelt realizes the only way America is going to be able to come up to speed, to be able to engage in a modern warfare on the scale which it's being fought in Europe by Nazi Germany, or that's being unleashed by Imperial Japan in the Pacific, is the only choice we have is to summon up and channel that energy and drive and entrepreneurship of the private sector to go forward. And I think what's happening now with this administration in particular, is we have an opportunity to dig down to that treasure again, to clear away the layers and layers of bureaucratic accretion that's taken place over the decades and get back to what it is that could make a really strong and effective defense industrial base that protects and secures not just us, but our allies as well.
There's a lot of latent capability in the United States. And I would say just even looking here, companies like our own, or companies like StriveWorks and Epirus, which are here, we're generating real capability.
Yeah.
And we're on the field, but we're eager to play even a bigger role. You mentioned PPB&E, the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution process. One thing I learned when I worked at Quantico, if you want to make a 4-star or a gunny feel the fear of God, just say PPB&E. You were the chief technical writer for the recent congressionally mandated commission to review PPB&E. What was your conclusion about the information backbone that's supposed to underlie that process?
Well, as you say, I was the technical author, helped them to draft and put together their interim reports and then also the final report. I should add, I was not a formal commissioner. So what my observations are ones that lie outside of that of the commissioners themselves. But for me, Jeb, it was an enormous learning process to really sort of see how the PPE system really kind of functions and runs on its own. And one of the things that was, I think, quite striking, and not in a good way, was the degree to which the information systems have simply proliferated over time. I go back to my archaeological dig, right, with layer upon layer of legacy systems, and that this is very much what's happened with information systems within DoD as a whole, with each service pursuing its own modernization plan, some moving faster than others, some departments and some agencies falling far behind in terms of their information capabilities, whereas others are, steadily forging ahead and looking for new ways in which to integrate even AI into the way in which they handle and share and transfer data and analyze data. But what you realized above all else is that the process of achieving a kind of efficiency and transparency within those information systems, of being able to bring things together so that different services and different departments and agencies can talk to one another and understand what they're doing by having a look at the critical data, the data they should be sharing and they understand, but can't under the current circumstances, that you come to realize that we have a long way to go to pull that all together. And the latest call now from outsiders is about, hey, when is the Pentagon going to pass an audit? And we talked about that. That was part of the discussion that we had at the table with the commission. But what you realize is that in order to make a move like that, move in a direction like that first of all you have to have a coherence, not necessarily a centralization, but a coherence in how information is stored, is gathered, stored, shared, and analyzed. And that really doesn't exist right now.
So the Pentagon tends to have all these old IT systems, and they've proliferated and they've accreted over 50, 70, sometimes even longer years. The way the private sector works, the way it's evolved, it's moved away from the old mainframe. It's moved to most of us in our daily lives. We don't own the software. It's software as a service, and that's whether it's Netflix or it's Spotify or even how I get my water bill.
Yeah.
It's a completely different system. What are the prospects that you see on some kind of more open system that has the necessary information, not only within the department, but also really importantly with its funders?
Well, with Congress. And this was one of the issues that we debated, and it was part of the discussion at the commission, because it's also Congress that wants to have appropriate access to the information and data that is flowing, where money is being spent, how it's being spent, and sort of what the projected costs are going to be in the future. But I want to say one thing on this too. And first of all, to answer your question, the short answer is yes. I think now this goes back to my optimism about what's happening now with this current administration, and that there is a strong opportunity now to bring that kind of coherence and organization to it. But it would be a mistake to think that the reason that these legacy systems have hung around, and that the reason why there is this kind of lack of coherence and regularity to the way in which these systems work, it has to do with a laziness or negligence or anything like that. What I found out talking to the real professionals who work in this area and who have to deal with these information systems, that paradoxically, it's a measure of their excellence and competence as professionals that they're ready to work with any system that they've got. You know, it's like, we can make do. This is what we've got, these old systems left over from the 70s, the 80s here. If that's what you're going to give me, then that's what I'll find a way to make it work. I often thought to myself, you know what? The DoD professionals, people in acquisition and sustainment, if you told them that they have to go back to using an abacus, that they probably say, okay, if we're going to have to use an abacus, we'll have to use an abacus. Let's figure out how to make that work. So from within the system, the focus isn't on these kinds of questions. Everybody will appreciate and celebrate big changes that modernize, that streamline, that bring together, bring coherence to the system here. But the effort is going to have to come from outside. It's not going to spring from inside, because people just have too many other things to do than fix the information systems in the way in which we're talking.
So talking about the outside, we have a change of administrations, we've got a new Congress, and we've got a lot of concern about America's posture vis-a-vis China in particular. Do you detect a greater degree of openness? Is there some opening of the gates for the new tech entrepreneurs?
I think there's a tremendous sense that they have got a lot of solutions that the Pentagon needs, that America's national security agencies in general, not just DoD, but all of them require, and that reaching out to what is happening with our tech leadership in areas like software, in areas that are reflected in AI, in robotics, in unmanned systems, that there's enormous promise there for big changes that will not only strengthen America going forward in our great power competition and dealing with an adversary like China, but also enable us to ultimately to prevail should such a conflict happen, should such a eventuality arise. You know, when Freedom's Forge was published in 2012, and you and I back then were talking about the inadequacies of our defense industrial base, of the acquisition and procurement status quo that we were facing. Someone said this, so we were saddled with this Soviet-style acquisition system. In fact, I think it was you. In fact, you were the one who actually used that expression, Soviet-style acquisition system. I remember that. that at that time, the issue of what could go wrong were more theoretical. We hadn't really thought about America at that point really facing a real adversary who might be ready to outpace us and outproduce us and outman us in a large-scale conflict of the kind that we faced in World War II or even in the Cold War. That's changed. And I think one of the reasons, if I may be immodest for a moment, one of the reasons why this book has caught fire in the defense community, in Congress, in the current administration, and in the previous administration, is that we're facing a situation very similar to what we faced in 1939, 1940, when my book starts, which is that reality is catching up with where our national security posture is, where our defense industrial base is, where the future of our America's defense is, and that time is short. And we've got to deal with the reality, which is that China has, right now, key advantages, although I think we have advantages which are still waiting to be uncovered and unleashed to deal with that threat.
So China's advantages are fiercely quick at the technology competition. Right. They have a lot of their own, not only appropriation of American technology, but they're developing their own as well, indigenously. They're a manufacturing behemoth. So what are those offsets? Where are those places where we can get some edge in just the next couple years?
Well, I think one of the other advantages that they have, in addition to their protective capacity, their willingness to commit huge resources, public resources, to areas like shipbuilding and to incorporate new technologies as they come along in order to modernize and streamline the process, is also they have an overall strategy. And it's a strategy which is organized top-down. What President Xi wants, President Xi gets. And where President Xi sees a national strategy for China, whether it's in hypersonics or whether it's in AI or whether it's in unmanned systems, then everybody understands that that's the strategy they're going to follow and they're going to take, all the way down to program managers know why they're doing it and what's expected of them. Now, that's a great advantage, but it is, in the end, an entirely top-down strategy. It all depends on the will of the chairman, of Xi. And if he changes his mind, then everybody moves in that direction. We saw that with regard to unmanned systems, where suddenly he became obsessed with hypersonics, and all the attention and production lines all moved towards, and the research and development moved to hypersonics. And if President Xi doesn't see it, then it doesn't happen. We have, in an open system like ours, in a more competitive environment, especially the one which is bred in the world of commercial technologies and the competitive world where you have to constantly think how to make it faster, cheaper, more efficient, of incorporating new technologies before the other guy does, that aspect of innovation, is one that I think is part and parcel of how our economy works. And when that got turned loose in 1940 with the building of the arsenal of democracy, as I describe it in the book, the results were staggering of what could be achieved in terms of not just productivity, but also in terms of incorporating innovation into the process and making it work. Now, China understands innovation with a small I. They know how to incorporate small incremental changes, bring about modernization and streamlining. Shipbuilding, for example, is a great example of that. Incorporating robotics, incorporating AI, and so on. They know how to do those things. But the next big leap, the next big technological leap, innovation with a capital I, that tends to spring out of an active and fully engaged private sector. President Xi has spent his time suppressing that private sector, right? Trampling on and suppressing and re-educating those entrepreneurs, the Elon Musks of China, been like Jack Ma, right? He's found ways in which to keep getting too big for their britches, bring them down, force them to adhere to the party line here. Our system is one that tends to promote that kind of innovative, thinking outside the conventional lines approach. And that is what I think will ultimately be the key to how we're going to prevail in all of the areas, in all the arenas in which our national defense and our defense industrial base are going to be facing serious challenges here. That again, that's where the treasure lies. Bring in the skills, the entrepreneurship, the drive, the energy of the private sector, bring it into the public sector to deal and find solutions to it, and I think we'll be amazed at what the results will be.
One of the issues the Defense Department has is it fundamentally buys things in a different way than the private sector does, buys it differently than ordinary people buy it in the American economy. The government has something called cost plus and time and materials. Cost plus, essentially, you keep a bill of what your costs have been and then you charge a fee on top. And the idea behind it was to save the taxpayer money. Paradoxically, it's led to vast inflation in costs and reduction in outputs. Do you have any thoughts on the nature of sort of the cost plus illness that we've got and what the alternatives are?
Yeah, well, there's also an historical irony here too, isn't there? Because as I describe in the Freedom's Forge, the cost plus contract was in many ways the savior of the American industrial base on the eve of World War II. The man to whom Roosevelt entrusted the creation of a defense industrial production surge, Bill Knudsen, CEO of General Motors and one of the heroes of the book. Knudsen understood from the very beginning that the only way he was going to be able to get commercial companies, even the biggest ones, the big automobile companies, the electronics companies like General Electric and Westinghouse, the telecommunications company like AT&T, the only way he was going to get them to really take on serious stake in the contracts for making war materiel, for converting over entire facilities from producing commercial products to producing tanks, trucks, and machine guns and artillery pieces. That the only way in which to do that was to introduce contracts in which the cost for making those conversions, the cost for even building new facilities would all be borne by the government. And that therefore that this was not something that would be scooped off of the bottom line for the companies signing those contracts.
So what's gone wrong?
So in many ways, the cost plus contract was a savior, but now I think it's become a drag. It's become a drag on the system. And I think what part of it is that as the competitive base for defense companies shrank, especially after the Last Supper, that the cost plus contract became more and more of a crutch, a means by which very large defense contractors, and small ones too, we mustn't put all the blame on the primes for this in any kind of way, became a way in which they were able to cushion whatever sorts of costs that they would assume as a result of a contract without having to worry about how high their overhead actually became. And it became a means by which, I think, to lock in the privileged position of certain companies, whereas others lagged behind. I think then, again, and here's the irony, that pushing out. I think the cost plus contract is on the execution dock. I think we're going to be going back to fixed price, and I think there's going to be a shift in perspective away from the contract goes to those who bid the lowest, to those who provide the most value. And that is going to be a competitive arena in which companies that have cut their teeth and have built their careers and built their businesses on the competitive marketplace of consumers and of competitors in those technology areas, that's where you're going to see those companies suddenly coming forward and being able to not only come up with a price for their contract, but also one that they'll be able to deliver not just on time, but ahead of time, and with a value that no one would have anticipated would come with it.
Yeah, one of the features of the leading companies in the commercial defense tech sector is they want to work on firm fixed price. They love the competitive challenge.
Yep.
The kind of engineers that they hire don't work by the hour. They work for growing the value of the company and sharing in some of those benefits over time. So it's a completely different mindset than an hourly employee.
Yeah, it is. And look, the Pentagon is an enormously complicated system, and acquisition and procurement has grown into those layers of that site, right, get more and more complicated as with the accretions that's taken place over time. And the skill that's required to negotiate your way through that labyrinth that is the modern defense acquisition system requires a different skill set than those that are required from an engineer, required from an entrepreneur, from a founder of a company. There are more of the skills that tend to gravitate into the legal profession, for example, into the realm of the lobbyist, into the realm of those who can work and find ways to bring together members of Congress and key figures in the defense establishment in order to arrive at a contract or arrive in a line of business that works to the benefit of your company and what's taking place here. You know, one of the things that I stress, I think, all the time, is that the world of business, the world of commercial entrepreneurship, is a world in which people are dedicated to making things happen. The realm of government is one in which people are dedicated to making sure that things don't happen. And sometimes that's good. You know, it's to avoid disasters, it's to avoid, massive fraud, it's to avoid all kinds of major mistakes in many ways. In fact, you could argue that the freedoms forged, the whole construction arsenal of democracy, was to make sure that something didn't happen, namely that Great Britain didn't fall into the control of the Nazis, as France had done. But the fact is that there's two communities which are built around making things happen, who see that as their mission. One is business, the world of the entrepreneurs. The other is the warfighter, right? They're mission-driven, and mission-driven is defeating the enemy. It's achieving objectives. It's that realm of active work here. And what a good and a strong defense acquisition system and defense industrial base system does is bring those two communities together to make sure that the entrepreneurship, the innovation, the drive and energy of the private sector is connected as closely and as intimately to serve and to provide the help for that other community of doers and makers, which is our war fighters and our military services. Government has a huge role to play. It's there to set the objectives. It's there to make sure that everything is working as it's supposed to do here. Its proper role is to broker the relationship between those other two communities, and then to get out of the way and let magic happen. That's what happened during World War II, when those two communities worked side by side together in order to achieve ultimate victory in two theaters, in the Pacific and Europe. And it's that role that government has become less and less of a facilitator of that connection and more of an obstacle. and a barrier to connecting those two communities. And what I'd like to see then is a way in which we go back to thinking about how do we bring the two of those together and allow that energy, allow that productive and mission-driven approach for both to work together again.
Well, I think that's the moment we find ourselves in, and that's the promise of this period. And there's a huge consequence to not getting it right, but the possibility of actually succeeding, given the forward movements in technology, given the fact that there is a widespread bipartisan understanding that the current defense acquisition system is no longer viable on its own terms. That's our opportunity.
And you know, in 1939, 1940, when my book begins, what we would call the defense industrial base was in terrible shape. It was a handful of government arsenals that were turning out handfuls of, many cases, obsolete equipment in many ways. And the government had no choice. Roosevelt had no choice. He had to completely change the rules by which a defense industrial base and acquisition worked. And the result was a miracle. I think if we can get this right this time, if we can get down to that treasure of that exists in World War II, of energy and drive and entrepreneurship and innovation and so on, I think we may see another miracle in the making.
Great. Thank you so much, Arthur Herman.
Yep. Thank you, Jeb. Appreciate it much. Thank you. Thanks.